Hello, listeners. Oh my God, we gotta do it again. Damn it,
All right,
TJ.
sorry.
Okay,
I didn't know if you were doing your. I was waiting for your Okay, where's your?
it's fine. Hello, listeners, and welcome to a very special edition of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I am joined by TJ from Pints and Puzzles. How's it going, TJ?
Woo! Hey.
Yeah, man, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for your new season starting here.
Yeah, we'll call it a season. Sure.
Well, I actually meant to ask you that before. I called it a season in the ending to the episode right before this one that I literally just finished recording like 10 minutes ago as we were texting. And I was like, everyone check out season 2 of Pints and Puzzles. And then I was like
season 2.
Yeah, I was like, is it a season? It's more like after a short hiatus. Anyways, we'll call it a season. It's whatever.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Man,
I will say this is probably anti-Pints and Puzzles because I'm drinking coffee, not beer for once.
Well, it is quite late your time. Shit, it's late my time, man. It's even later your time.
But yeah, it's been late, and I forgot how much damn work podcasting is, man. like people, and I know the average person thinks, oh yeah, I only have a microphone and a computer and a glorified Harry Potter closet under my basement step, But I mean, the script writing and the editing, I forgot how long that stuff takes.
Dude, so it's actually really funny. Yesterday. So Marie we're kind of giving away some of the secrets to how the sausage gets made here on the Mad Scientist Podcast. Marie has been recording under a desk with a blanket over it to make it sound good from her end. And then for me, I bought this kind of like a noise cancellation little kind of like, I don't know, maybe like a quarter cylinder without a top kind of thing, like a foam backing board for my voice. But then, even that, I started playing around with, blankets and crap to just, stick over my head while I listened. All the blankets we have in this house are, little heat shields. It's I recorded for, 2 minutes the other day, and I almost passed out from heat exhaustion. I was like, oh, my God, this is impossible.
As you and I are talking right now, I just cracked the door open to my studio thing.
Right.
Because of that reason, and I have the same thing, and granted, I always wonder if it's overkill because you and I have dynamic mics. Not to get too dorky here for our listeners, but they don't pick up a whole lot of background noise. But
the thing is, they don't pick up a lot of background noise until you're at the end of a 3-hour recording session.
Correct.
And your fucking cat is scratching at the door, let me in. What are you doing in there, dude? And then all of a sudden, it picks up every fucking thing. Yep. It's ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, it's actually funny. The time, I mean, how much time would you say you put in each episode, in a week?
It really varies. I mean, you would think, a normal person having 2-3 months off, however long I took off, would be way ahead of schedule. I was like, I have 2 outlines, I'm good. That to me is really far ahead of schedule because I'm the ADD procrastinator that will wait till the last possible second to do anything, which worked great when I was in a journalism intern, but doesn't work so great for any other area.
You're trying to kind of run it. Yeah, I mean, so I find it was actually really interesting. Listeners, if you're not part of this Facebook group, you totally should be. It's called Podcasts We Listen To, and what's really cool is it puts together a lot of listeners and fans together. But so I was looking on that Facebook group, and someone posted a thing that was just well, how long do you find yourself researching in a given week? And I started counting it up, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I don't do anything else.
Yeah, and for me it varies because I'm just I have 10 minutes here, so I'll go on my phone. I purposely have the iPhone, 6 Plus, so it's a mini mini laptop size screen, and just so I can be I have the baby's asleep in the car for 10 minutes, so I'm gonna go Google something, or whatever it is. But I mean that only takes you so far. At a certain point, you do need a physical laptop to type, or I haven't figured out a way to plug this microphone into my iPhone yet. I know there probably is a way. I haven't done it yet. So there's all sorts of crazy shit that we could get into, but for me it's always hard. even I remember when I was in corporate, they were like, "Oh, how many hours do you spend on like a report?" And I'm like, "It depends, you know,
Oh
like
yeah, of course.
you know,
Yeah.
X, Y, or Z. It depends." And then if I ever had to try to track it, I spent more hours trying to track, like figure out an Excel spreadsheet to track it than I
Sure.
did actually doing the report. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so I feel like it's kind of a similar thing. And honestly, if I start like trying to track stuff like that, then it becomes a job, and then I'm not going to like it anymore.
We
This
so
is
yeah, I
still
see that.
like a hobby, borderline side business, kind of heading in that direction for at least for my end. I think you're more probably a little further along that continuum.
Well, I mean,
Um,
yeah, I mean, I think well, so I think actually, so it's actually kind of interesting. I was talking to a couple of other hosts that we're friendly with and whatever, and they were asking like, well, what do you want this to be? Like, if there was a perfect scenario for you with a show, what would you want it to be, right? And really, like, if I was able to dedicate the time that I want to in researching this stuff and coming out with things, like these episodes would be like 4 hours long. You know what I mean? There's already so much content we have to cut from these episodes,
mhm.
just because like you get like the Betty and Barney Hill case that we just did, right? There there are hours of footage of them being interviewed and loads of books written, and there are theories we didn't get to get into, and the way it connects to the cases that came before it and now the cases that came after it, the Zeta Reticuli
Yep, yep.
being the
And that one's been around for so long that it's almost been like there's just too much out there in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
it's
Like
well,
I don't envy you that you had to go through
it's
all
well,
that at all.
the good thing, like we were talking about beforehand, like that case to me, the Benny and Barney Hill case, was that was my childhood case. That was the case that scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. That was the thing I was like, I had loads of books on it. I read about it all the time. I always found stuff that linked back to it. Like that's really the case. Like I said, if I was ever gonna write like a paranormal book, I'd probably start with that one. You know, just because there's so much, it's so rich, and two, I have the link to it geographically. Like I've been on those roads. I've lived in Portsmouth.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool when you were doing your episode. Is not only do you have that connection and kind of that personal draw to it for whatever reason, but then you have the proximity location too. So, but that had to have been kind of cool as a kid, where you're like, oh, you're obsessed with this case, but then you could actually go drive down that road when you're
Well,
17,
so the
18.
thing, so yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean, the thing, like that was really cool. Um, the first time I went up to visit Katie's, so my link to New Hampshire is Katie. Basically, her family owns a house in New Hampshire, in a town that's pretty active for UFOs. Again, when we keep making the hint for this episode that's coming out, we're doing an episode on that town. Okay, it's gonna happen, listeners. But the like yeah, like going there and just knowing like, man, this is the same place. Like this is we're on the road where it happened. We're you know what I mean? It's
yeah,
it's pretty cool. I mean, it's also kind of scary, like I talked about I didn't get into it too much in the episodes, but like I talk about how I myself have been fooled on those roads. Like you can be driving, I mean, Pennsylvania gets like this too, though, where it's like there's no lights on the road. It's dark. There are hills and mountains and stuff. Like there have been times where I've completely lost the moon, and suddenly, like I expect it to be on my left, and it's on my right. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
like what happened?
And you also get that, and you're right. Pennsylvania, I always feel like we go up northeast too, towards your way from, kind of the general Philly region
Sure.
where we are here. And I always say that drive, even though it's a little longer to like Massachusetts area, is actually better than the drive out to Pittsburgh, because that's like boring as anything. It's just farms and
Right.
just like you forget half your drive because you zone out, like,
Yeah.
which sounds horrible when you're
No,
driving,
well,
but it's
that's
true.
that's one of the things we get into. Like the downside to us doing this episode right after I finish recording part two is TJ hasn't gotten to listen to part two yet, listeners. So, but I actually talk about that in the episode where like everyone does that, right? Where you forget, you literally get to where you're going and you're like, what happened? You know what I mean? Like half that trip I don't remember at all.
And I will say, even worse than that, I just drove out to Michigan from here, which was 11 hours, 11
Yeah.
hour drive. Indiana, Thank God I drove that during the day.
Oh,
Like, because if I tried to do that at night, I probably would have thought there was UFOs all over the place because it's
so
just empty cornfields. And
driving out here, like so when we moved from New Hampshire to Minnesota, the first time we did the trip, we drove we drove during the day for like we tried to do the day most of it, but there was one point where we were coming to like near the Lake Erie area, and it's like really dark at night. It's completely black out there, and like the moon off the lake itself, like we got up to the lake without realizing how close we were to the lake.
yeah.
And like Katie was, sleeping, whatever, and then we fucking hit where the lake is, and maybe it wasn't even like lake. I don't even know what the hell we saw. We saw a giant body of water, whatever the hell it was, and you see it like the moon on the lake, and you're like, oh my, like it comes out of fucking nowhere. You know what I mean? Like it's really hard to keep your bearings in dark roads. Much harder than I think we give credit to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where, and I'm sure you probably get into this again. As you said, I didn't listen to your part 2 yet. Shit, sorry. Are you picking up that background noise?
No.
Okay, good. As we were also talking about, you can leave this in, I don't care. But as we were also talking about off the air, is that it's hot as shit in the podcasting closets that we build or the setups that we build. So I have my door cracked open, but the downside is the air condition for the house is right there, which in October the air condition needs to be on. Go figure.
It's warm. It's very warm. It can be
If
warm.
only there was a podcast that talked about climate
If
change.
only.
I don't remember the episode number. Sorry.
I don't either. It's probably like 18 or 19, 20 maybe. I don't know.
Somewhere in the beginning.
Somewhere
Anyway.
around there. Anyways.
All
Yeah,
right.
man.
ADD. Oh, look, squirrel. Okay.
Oh, we're good.
Going back. But anyway, yeah, you get really unfocused while you're driving at night too.
Yeah.
And I always get this weird thing at dusk where it kind of gets a little funky for my vision anyway, like where it starts to get dark. But when it's completely black, even driving home, it was from Michigan. It was in the middle of the night. By the time I got towards the Pennsylvania side, and that drive kind of hits 80 up by Scranton, and I've done that drive,
Sure.
all through college for me. So I'm used to that, and there was points where I was like, okay, where am I for a second?
Yeah.
Even though I've done that drive how many times?
Yeah,
So
sure.
to your point, I could definitely see where your mind would start playing tricks on you. And part of me, I don't know if you get into that, but part of me wonders if it's to entertain you too. Like your brain gets bored, is like, oh, I can't go to sleep because I'm driving, so let's start making lights. Like I don't know if there's any science behind that.
Yeah.
But
So what's actually really interesting is it's actually the opposite. Your brain shuts down parts of itself.
oh,
Yeah, like so.
that's scary.
Yeah, it's really scary, right? So when you're doing a monotonous or boring task, your brain will shut off parts that aren't being used to conserve energy and give them a break, pretty much. Right? It's called micro sleep.
Okay.
So this is actually, and so when you're really fatigued and doing a monotonous task like driving or conducting a train or driving a bus or whatever, that is when you get into like when people say that they fall asleep behind the wheel, you don't actually fall asleep. What happens is you zone out until you crash into something.
Oh wow.
And it's because like your brain shuts off and you start to make mistakes. So like your brain basically tells itself like, okay, you should expect that the road will continue straight here. But then like if a deer darts out or there's a curve that you weren't anticipating or whatever, your reaction time is slowed and suddenly you're like, shit, I'm skidding off the road but it's too late.
So it's almost like a built-in autopilot or something.
Exactly. It is
so
exactly
cool.
a built-in autopilot. And so they've actually done tests like what I found really fascinating was they talked about doing we actually did another topic on this. I didn't even link in the full episode, but now that I'm thinking about it, it links up perfectly. We actually answered Tess Feifel's question from Astonishing Legends. We answered her question on our last roundtable where we said, she asked why when you're really tired do you hallucinate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because your brain shuts off certain parts of itself that do things like optical illusions, right? And also your brain is filling in the gaps, right? So your brain is so tired that it starts filling in the gaps for lots more stuff than it normally would or should.
That's so weird. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. And for me, taking the step back, kind of bigger picture, that evolutionarily, isn't that kind of cool that your brain's even wired that way?
Oh, it's
To be able to
extremely, it's
do all it.
extremely cool.
Like,
Well, it
I'm
links.
sure there's some kind of caveman thing for that, where it's like we need to survive for more energy while stalking woolly mammoths or something like that.
Well,
But
yeah, it all links back to this idea of like, what is our brain? Like, our brain isn't fast enough to take in all the sensory information it gets at once, right? And so it's always filling in blanks. It's like always making assumptions. And that's why things like that stupid dress that was like, is it white? Is it gold or whatever, blue or gold or whatever the hell it was? You remember that, right?
yeah.
Okay.
It was blue.
That's yeah,
Anyway.
whatever the hell it was.
It was
Let's
blue.
not get into it. That that is why those things happen, is because your brain is getting all the sensory information and it normally expects something to work a certain way. But so then when you can show it that it isn't working that way, your brain doesn't really know what to do. And so, yeah, like I think there's probably a lot to be said for that explanation of a good portion of UFO cases, right? The Hills case was something of a perfect storm, I'd say, where it's like, not only did Betty have previous knowledge of UFOs, not only did she have these dreams after the fact, not only was Barney prone to anxiety and really tired from months of working late nights without adequate sleep, like all of these things came together to create a storm for this case, you know?
Yeah.
But that kind of, but the thing is that I try to get across in my episode, but I wonder if I'm almost coming off as too skeptical. There are cases where things are just weird, right? Like Travis Walton's case that you talk about in your first episode back.
Yeah, that was so for me. That was my childhood case, which I think
Sure.
is kind of funny that and I always say this with Sam too from Not Alone, because we have our little kind of pod fraternity, for lack of a better term,
Friends!
and Marie, our pod
Yeah.
fraternity and Marie.
Fraternity,
So
listen, a fraternity can have
that's
both
true. I
all
guess not.
genders.
Yeah.
Fraternity can have both sexes, all genders, everything possible. You know. Anyways, continue.
Anyway, I'm gonna get some messages. That's but anyway, regardless of that, yeah. So we have our little fraternity thing here, but it's kind of weird that we're all kind of, or a lot of times, we're on similar pages as far as topic ideas, or just like, hey, I was going to do a story on blah blah blah, and then it's like, no shit, I just did a story on that,
Right.
like, or,
Yeah, we all kind of did UFOs at the same time, right? So Not Alone just did Skinwalker Ranch parts 1 through 3, which are awesome and you should listen to. You're doing a month of UFOs. I decided to do the Betty Barty Hill case a while ago. Like, pretty interesting.
yeah, I think it's kind of cool, and I mean, granted, Skinwalker covers everything in the weird
Yeah,
shit
Skinwalker's
category,
like a smorgasbord of weird stuff. Yeah.
you name it. There's there's the dog man in the van, and that cracks me up. But that's for both when I heard it on Not Alone and Astonishing Legends. That cracked
Right.
me up. Like that was just like, I was like, why is he in a trail? Never mind.
Why is he carrying Venom? This doesn't make any sense. Why is
I
he
think
a samurai?
the more you try to figure out Skinwalker, the less it's going to make sense to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But whew, ADD. All right, refocus. See what happens when I don't drink on episodes.
Bad, man. Too much coffee.
I know, or not enough. I'm not sure which, but yeah. So it's funny that when you said hey, let's record this tonight, and this is 3 hours ago, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Then I was like, it's kind of ironic that we're recording this at the same time that we kind of talked about our Genesis stories kind of down the rabbit holes of UFOs, and kind of down that road. So yours is the Betty and Barty Hill case, and then mine, for whatever reason, I don't have the connection to Arizona. Been out there once as a kid, definitely never been to Snowflake, but it's It's weird that was, like I say in the episode, that was the first book I had. I had the physical Fire in the Sky book, which I'm really pissed I can't find anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
man.
but I had that, and I remember the movie, and I know the Hollywood movie was a complete fabrication of his version of the events, but it still scares the shit out of me even to this day.
Sure.
Where that whole thing where they put that sheet over that skin type sheet over his face or whatever, and he was screaming.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a pretty rough. I mean that. Yeah, that's
and
like
that never
pretty
happened, by the way,
scary.
in the real version.
No, but it's scary on film. I mean, it's fine.
But it did its job because I still remember it, however
Right.
many years later. So
Right. Yeah.
clearly they did something right on the Hollywood version. But yeah, it's just been one of those things for me. And I honestly also think that no matter how skeptical you are, it's really hard to um, debunk this case. I didn't want to use debunk because debunkers and skeptics are two very different things in my head. And I think you probably touched on this, I think, a few times on a couple roundtables, but they're very different things as far as their approach to thing to
Yeah, we try. Yeah, we try to get into it. I mean, I think there is. I think there's a difference between being cynical about these things and being open, but also not like like there's because there's true believers too, which is actually in some ways even worse, right? I
hmm
mean, a true believer you can convince them of anything, you know. A skeptic, in my mind, a skeptic is someone who waits to have all the facts before making a decision, or at least puts together all possible combinations of events that could be out there, right? So, like, with the Hill case, we say, it's very possible that what happened really did happen to them, and we can't say for certain that it didn't, but there's also a really good skeptical case to be made here, So, yeah. Anyways, yeah, so I agree with you. I think
but then you have the
skeptics are
debunkers,
totally
which are
different.
more like, oh, they're kind of the other extreme of the non-believer or of the true believers, where they are like, okay, there's no logical or scientific argument here, so I'm going to start just attacking them, the people personally.
Sure.
And that happened a lot. And our my favorite guy, Philip Klass, who's the biggest a-hole on the
You
planet.
know what's really funny is I actually like some of Philip Klass's essays on UFOs. I actually use one of them in this episode, part two, because I think the argument he makes is quite fascinating and actually probably really good. But yeah, in real life, I mean, he was a distasteful person. I mean,
Yeah,
he was
and I
not
think the Travis case, for whatever reason, just
got
pissed
to
him
him.
off.
It got to him so bad. Yeah, man. Okay. Here's the thing. I think there are extreme personalities in both camps, right?
Correct.
There
Correct.
are
Yeah.
a lot of people in the UFO community who I would argue are maybe doing more harm than they are doing good, right?
Right.
At the same time, there are people in the skeptical community doing more harm than good. I mean, you shouldn't be belittling these people for saying that they experienced something because regardless of what it is that they actually experienced or whatever their reasons are for potentially even making it up, um something weird happening with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That we should
Exactly.
be
And
trying to get to the bottom of. Like
even
that's
if it's a
well,
hallucination,
even
it's
even if it's
still like freak
even
them
if it
out.
like
you
even
know.
even if it's a complete fabrication, even if they're completely lying, why do they feel compelled to lie like this? You know what I mean? Like
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of interest. I mean, I don't mean to belabor the point, but like there's something going on with this, regardless of whether or not it's aliens or mass hallucinations or a weird media psychosomatic kind of thing where people are making these claims for attention. Like something fucking weird is happening with that.
Mm-hmm. And
Anyways,
and the weird thing with Travis's case too. I mean, like you said, I think Class had a bug up his ass for whatever reason about that case. Like, there's and I didn't talk about this on the episode because like you said, it would have gone on for 6 hours, but and nobody has time to write that kind of script. Um, so, but unless you're the Podfathers, but they. But there was this Larry King live interview clip where he was on there with, I think it was Mike Rogers, and this was back when Class was still alive, and he was just like, they were going at each other, and then it just got to a point where he just got so pissed off, and he's like called him a moron or something, or probably other words in there, and then it just shut it down, and they went to commercial, like, and it's
Yeah.
one of those things where he just got so pissed off at it for whatever reason, but that to me is what got me believing it even more. Is why is he picking this case to have a bug up his ass about? What, he could have just left it as it is and let people make up their own minds.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing with Class. So I actually after listening to your episode, I actually really want to do a full episode on Class himself
Mhm.
and talking about, because like we get requests sometimes for people to do more kind of like history of science episodes that I think would be really cool. So I want to do someone like fascinating scientists and their stories and whatever. And we try to do some of that, but it's it can be hard um, to talk about. It can be really dry. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? In some cases,
History
like
class can be boring sometimes.
yeah, you know what I
Yeah.
mean. So
Yeah.
like, and so we haven't really dipped our toe into it too hard yet, but I think we're gonna start maybe peppering them in. But I think Class would be a really fascinating study for that, because if you look at the things that he wrote about not the Travis Walton case, he can be quite positive towards the idea of UFOs. I think there's a quote that he said something like, 97% of the people I talk to about UFOs who claim to have seen something, I think genuinely feel like they saw something, and
Right.
only a small portion he thought were legitimately misleading him in the public,
And he has
right?
some great like avionics stuff back when he was doing his General Electrics, or I think it was
Well,
GE
yeah,
he
like,
worked for.
well,
You
yeah,
know,
there's a lot.
he's so he was
Yeah,
smart, like he was a smart guy, and I think he did do some legitimate good stuff in there. It was up until you get to his comments about the Walton case, then to me is when that started turning me completely off from him. Where it's like,
yeah.
why is he taking this personally? And then there's speculation around that too, of course, that somebody got to him at some point, and that's why he's taking this particular one more personally than other ones.
Sure. I mean, so for listeners at home who you should listen to TJ's show for sure. So please, if you want to learn more about this case, go listen to his show. It's really good. But in general, the Travis Walton case, for those that don't know, is this guy was out with some work colleagues, I guess you'd call them, or friends, work colleagues, and they see a craft. He thinking that, he, being curious, goes up to it, gets shocked by it, and then gets taken by the craft. And he then recounts based like a horror show inside the ship. He's
Yeah, well, the horror show side, I think, is the Hollywood version. To be honest, I think it's more. It actually was just more. You wake up somewhere after being electrocuted and don't know where the hell you are. So it's more the adrenaline kind of panic rather than the aliens. I don't think were torturing him and doing the.
well, I don't.
Do you remember the
I
movie where they had the ocular probe
I was
coming
gonna,
down
of
at it?
course,
like I don't think that
yeah.
actually happened. From
All I was gonna
the.
say, like, not necessarily a horror show in that sense. And I guess what I mean is, he had tests done to him supposedly that scared him. I'm sure, and it's kind of like the general abduction story that we think of, right? And yeah, and the thing is that there were like he was missing for like a couple days.
Yeah, he thought it was. It felt like I think he said like an hour and a half or something along those lines, but it was really 5 days. So
Yeah,
when he woke up in the phone booth, so spoiler alert, they did return him, and he's doing speaking engagements for the next 40 years. But they did return him, and he didn't know. He thought it was just a couple hours, and then they're like, "No, feel your face," and he had 5 days worth of beard growth on his face, and he's like, "Wait, what the hell happened?" And
yeah,
that's where. But the interesting thing was he was never so it may have been slightly misleading in my episode. That may be um, uh, due to my interviewee, just how she phrased it, but not necessarily in a bad way. But she said he was never hypnotized. He was hypnotized, but the story it wasn't to bring out the story like it was in the Betty and Barney Hill case. It
sure.
was more it was more actually to calm him down so that he could tell the story without freaking out.
Sure, sure. Well, it's actually kind of interesting in the Betty and Barney Hill case. So that's actually what hypnotism is supposed to be used for therapeutically, right? Is to help you relate or help you get through something traumatic by letting you approach it in a non-traumatic setting, right? That's kind of the general point. But and the ability to use hypnosis to recall memories is not very well scientifically proven. In fact, the opposite is proven, that hypnosis makes you create false memories. So yeah.
Which is part of what
Anyways,
they were saying with the Betty and Barney Hill case, right?
absolutely. Well, that's actually it's actually part of why I think the Travis Walton case is so fascinating, is the fact that he recalled this out of hypnosis. You know what I mean?
Right.
If it was under hypnosis, that immediately creates a lot of potential for wiggle room, right?
Well, and then the cool thing was, and I think where this ties into being slightly ironic that you and I are doing this episode now, or that you even brought this up earlier today, was that the one of the arguments against Travis's case was that there was a documentary that came out about Betty and Barney Hill, I think a week or something before Travis was abducted.
Sure.
Right. So they're all like, oh, he just saw that. And that's where he came up with these gray aliens and the Nordics and stuff like that. And that's why, I even messaged you when I was writing my script. I'm like, there was no gray aliens in the,
No,
in the Betty and
well,
Barney Hill case. And there wasn't,
well,
right? Like,
no. But so here's the thing, though. It's been morphed over time, right? So no, Betty and Barney Hill described seeing kind of like just ugly humans. You know what I mean? Like they were just kind of like weird looking ugly humans in the ship, and they had grayish skin, but they were just kind of like they had normal human eyes. They were just kind of bigger than ours.
mhm.
You know what I mean? So like they described just super ugly humans.
Which I think you did a
Different.
really good job of explaining that in your first episode. So there's your episode plug now, even though this is probably for my listeners that are listening.
Right.
I'm going to recommend you go back to Mad Scientist for part one.
Yeah.
No, but it's true. Like I think you did a good job of explaining that concisely and kind of getting, because that's different too, on the other end of different from most alien abduction cases or other cases where they saw something or claimed to have been abducted.
Yeah, it's extremely different. I mean, it really is like this. So the thing with the Betty and Barney Hill case, I think, is that it's. I think for a lot of people, it was their introduction to the field. Like it's
Correct.
their introduction to this sort of thing. You know what I mean? And it's the first one that really happened and gained like national attention.
Hmm.
And so, and it's because these were, first off, it's two people that claim that this happened to both of them, right? So that gets rid of the whole idea of like, oh, it's a drunk dude or someone on a bender
Right.
or whatever, right?
Right.
Something more interesting is going on there. But, and it also involved two people who were respected in their community. You know what I mean? Educated, intelligent people, calm, rational people. But at the same time, their story has kind of taken on a life of its own. You know, the things that they talk about, like I had no idea. Like I knew from reading all these stories and everything, as a kid, that Betty's experience was more positive than Barney's was, right?
Right.
But I never realized just how much more positive it was.
And I
Like
think that,
Betty
to
was
your
like, "Yeah,
point,
come back."
that you've kind of hinted at is that could be kind of their see, I don't want to do any spoilers in case you talk about any of it, but like kind of their dispositions anyway.
No, we do cover it. Yeah, absolutely. Like
Where Barney has the more anxious mind frame, so he's going to recount a more anxious story, even if it's the same exact story. You know what I mean?
exactly. Yeah, I think it's totally good. So Travis Walton, right? Listen. I'm gonna play a complete debunker.
Okay.
Right now. Okay. I'm gonna play the debunker. I am a skeptic. I don't know what happened to Travis Walton, but I'm gonna play a debunker. Travis Walton goes out into the woods with some buddies. They go on a bender. He goes out and is out away from home for 5 days doing whatever the hell he wants. He comes back and he's like, we can't tell my wife what happened. We're going to say I saw a UFO. right? Travis Walton has the best 5 days of his fucking life.
That was part of the debunker case, but it was more. Yeah, there was more to it. But go ahead.
But yeah, no, but seriously though, right? Like, or hell, I mean, Travis Walton goes out into the field, goes out with some buddies. Something horrendous happens to him, right? A physical thing horrendously happens to him. Something in this universe of just like humans being shitty to each other happens to him. Who knows what it is? And he blocks it out in his mind. Right? That's a thing. That's a thing that we don't get into with the. I didn't get into with the Betty and Barney Hill case in my episode, but the sexual aspect to a lot of these UFO cases, like, suggests to a lot of people that they're actually it's people repressing and making sense of terrible things that happen to them as children, or
Correct. Yeah.
very very real human, like, humans are evil enough to each other that we don't need aliens coming down and probing us.
Right.
Like, we don't need aliens helping us to be shitty to us. We're already shitty enough to each other. And that's always a part of these cases that I think has to be considered. But so what did Travis have any physical evidence?
So
Anything?
I think the bigger argument was that there was not any physical evidence to really back up that side of the story, right? So here's the skeptic side, or the debunker side, adding on to what you just said. So the theory was that Travis and Mike Rogers, who happened to be the boss of this logging crew as well, but they were also best friends, right? And ironically, later on in life, Travis ended up marrying Mike's sister. So I thought that was just an interesting side note.
That's an part of the story.
But so anyway, they're really good friends, right? And the theory was that they kind of rigged a weather balloon, of course, always a weather balloon, and like a light show type of thing. The other four guys, I'm doing my math in my head, had no clue what the hell was going on. So they thought it was exactly how they talked about it, right? Travis went to this weird light, and then he disappeared. And then their thing is, oh, he was in a cabin in the woods, hiding out somewhere, and then either he was on drugs or he had some kind of IV fluid to keep him alive, but he still didn't eat anything, so that's why he was malnourished, right? Then they dropped him back off, and all this was to get them out of their logging contract that they were behind. Which I never knew. I've heard that logging contract story before, but I never knew that it was class that put that forward. So that was interesting in and of itself.
Well, let's turn this on its head a little bit. Let's say they did decide to play a prank, right? They decide to play a prank. It goes horribly wrong. Travis is electrocuted. His buddy now thinks he's dead. Holy shit, I killed my friend. They leave him there. They drive home, and that guy goes back to check on him later, and he's not there. He's wandering around. He got electrocuted. He's dazed. He's freaking out. He kind of just like hangs around until he regains his memory. And then he comes back and he's like, what the hell happened to me? And him and the guy know what happened to him. But if he says anything, that guy might go to jail for attempted murder. They're going to look like fucking morons. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And actually, your theory makes more sense than the original debunker theory.
I mean, no. Definitely these loggers had access to IV.
Right.
They were going to make IV fluids, and they definitely wouldn't have actually introduced an air bubble.
The other thing was he had one red mark on his arm. And that was like the only physical injury he had from this, right? So people were like, "Oh, that's where he was shooting up heroin or some kind of psychedelic drugs or whatever along those cases." But he did pass a drug test when he came back. When they did his medical workup, they didn't find any trace of anything in his system. And I know there's different things that can go, faster through your system or maybe not show up in the late 70s,
I was gonna say, I mean, acid, he could have been doing all kinds, and that's the thing too. I mean, another part of this that I think is kind of interesting that we never, have you ever heard of the toy box killer?
Vaguely. Remind me.
Okay, so Marie and I are getting deep into true crime right now because we're starting up our true crime series, which we're actually going to record the first one this weekend. So listeners, get excited. But so and Marie is Marie's like a freaking detective. Like, it's terrifying the things Marie can find out.
Oh, if
She's
I ever
really
disappear, I want her investigating my my murder. You know.
fine. Yeah, I could not go missing for 5 days. Marie would find me. Like, I have no doubt Marie would find me. So, the toy box killer was this guy that basically he owned like a what's the word, like a trailer, I guess. So his real name was David Parker Ray. He owned a little weird like trailer kind of thing in the New Mexico desert. He lived in Elephant Butte, New Mexico, right? And so he had this trailer where he would basically bring women and do terrible things to them and just like continually, hold them basically
Yeah.
and do what you can imagine
Yep.
a psychopath would do. And he then would drug them so completely that they would leave not knowing what the hell happened to them.
Wow.
Like they literally could not remember, right? One of his victims only remembered because the police found one of her photos like he took pictures. They matched her to one of the photos they found in his collection, and they were like, "Hey, do you remember this guy?" And like suddenly it came flooding back for her,
I got you.
right? And these women were missing for like weeks at a time.
Did he have like a not to give people notes, but did he have like a specific how did they figure out they
I
were a
mean,
drug? You know what I mean?
he
Like,
would
did
just he
they have
would
like a drug
just
of
do
choice type of thing? You know?
yeah, no, like he would just kind of like it's the same way that it's the same thing that they did in MK Ultra basically. If you just give
I
someone
got you.
so many psychedelic drugs and beat them down to the point where their sense of self is lost, you can make them forget. You know what I mean? And so like that kind of shit that really happened. You know what I mean? How many of those women still don't know that happened to them and think they were abducted by aliens?
Yeah, that's true.
Like it's like I don't think I don't think that's a ridiculous, like it sounds ridiculous and it sounds like it's belittling what happened to these people. I don't mean it that way. But I think it's a very serious question we have to ask ourselves. What can the brain force itself or be forced to forget? Right? That is a part of these stories that I think always has to be mentioned. And it's something that I think when if someone came up to you and said like we have friends who claim that they've seen UFOs,
Right.
who claim that they've seen aliens,
Oh.
right? Um, like that is true. You know what I mean? To them, they think that happened to them, and so it becomes a point where it's like what they're seeing versus what really happened, does that actually matter anymore? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, either way, it's a horrible event and they believe it. So it's not a matter of convincing them, oh, you're wrong. It's more a matter of, all right, figure out what the hell actually happened. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. And I think as well too, if Betty and Barney Hill came up to me and said like, "Hey, we think we saw a UFO. We think we were abducted," the first thing you don't want to be is like, were you kidnapped
Right.
by a crazy person?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you don't
Were
want
you
to say that.
tortured in a trailer? You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you don't want to say that kind of stuff, right? Because that's almost more in some ways to some people that's more unlikely than them being abducted by aliens. So,
But then you're right. When you hear about, especially going, we'll get back to the Travis thing. So I didn't forget about that. But when you hear about some of the cases, especially from like the '80s, where it's kind of the mean grays, for lack of a better term,
yeah,
you wonder. I mean, some of that may be TV, and that was during unsolved mysteries and sightings and all that stuff. So that definitely probably didn't help some of that. But imagine if you had some kind of traumatic childhood experience like you're talking about that you suppressed for whatever reason in your head, and then you see sightings, and then your brain puts that together while you're sleeping, and suddenly you think you were abducted. And again, to
yeah.
your point, not belittling people who were legitimately abducted, and not belittling people who had some kind of traumatic experience, but this is how the brain could kind of rewire itself to think certain things.
Right. And the thing that I actually find really fascinating too is like at least for me, the cases that I find the most compelling are the ones that have no real relation to other cases, right? Like, I mean, that sounds kind of silly. Obviously, this rash of sightings, like, so the quote we actually use from Philip J. Klass in this episode, it goes some, or it's not really a quote from him. It's a foreword to an essay he wrote. But the basic thesis statement of this essay is that if we assume that UFOs are real, then we should expect that the vast majority of sightings are false, right? But there will be a couple of real ones. On the other hand, if we assume that they're not real, then all the sightings are false. But in any case, the vast majority of sightings would be false. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Okay. I think I'm following that in my my communications major brain is following some of that.
Sorry,
But,
I kind
no,
of
it's all
explained
right.
it like really crappily.
No.
Basically,
So, but I think I think that point, even though it was specific to UFOs, I think that's how you have to look at quote unquote conspiracy theories, which
absolutely.
which anymore it's like we can't say we're conspiracy theorists, but given the current environment nowadays. But I mean, essentially that's where we all started, was on conspiracy theory message boards. I think most of us started there in our younger years.
I would say that's an accurate
Yeah. But I think that's how I always said
Guarded. I never left.
I always said that there was like, there's the 5% on that board. That's the what the hell's his name? David Icke. No, well, yeah, the David Icke Hollow Earth people, which also a great episode of Mad Scientist. But then, and there's also like the John Lear Soul Catcher on the Moon type of thing. So that falls in that 5% that's just, in my head, too batshit crazy to even worry about. Like a fun story, but probably wouldn't even make a good movie. That like that type of thing. And then there's another 80% or so that are okay, this is just bullshit. It's that other small percentage, whatever my math is down to, 10%, that are true and legitimately happened, or to your point, people think legitimately happened, that you have to pull out from all the other crap. And that's the hard part.
I mean, for every Sandy Hook hoax, conspiracy, and Pizzagate bullshit, there's the government is letting the people of Flint die from lead in the water.
Correct. Or or to your point, for every Pizzagate thing, even though now we've triggered echelon computers, but whatever. For every Pizzagate, there's a legitimate creep out there that's legitimately doing something.
Yeah, no. I mean, for every Pizzagate, there's like real pedophile rings out there.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Yeah, so
I think that yours, you were talking specific to UFOs, but that's how kind of you have to look at, I think most people should be looking at kind of the conspiracy or I don't know a better way of putting it other than weird shit world right now,
I think it's true of most claims, really, right? I mean, for every, I don't know, I mean, these are fantastic claims, of course. So for every fantastic claim, I think it's the same way. For every 1,000 people that say that, I don't know, they met Derek Jeter, maybe 5 of them really did.
Right,
you know what I mean? Like,
correct, yeah.
It's
and the other trick is they're not always the loudest ones either, though. The ones that are true.
No, well, that's what I mean is that so the thing is, like, let's say, okay, the Betty and Barney Hill case. People claim, thousands of people a year, I'm sure it's even more than that. I'm just pulling numbers off the top of my head, claim now that they have had contact with gray aliens, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that to some people, the fact that so many claim that they've had these experiences is proof positive, right? It's like, what, well, there has to be something there, right? But I would argue that the sheer number of them possibly precludes most of them from being true. We need to be really careful about which ones we consider true and which ones we don't. And it's those cases that have something interesting, something specific to them that isn't part of the standard, that become the really interesting ones.
And I think that the two that we've been harping on are, the Betty and Barney Hill one, they were trying to tell them showed the star map, that was the real interesting thing, right? At least in my head, because that's the one piece I remembered prior to your
So
first episode.
it's actually interesting. For a lot of people, the star map is the most interesting thing. For me, it's like the least interesting thing, actually. Um, for me, the most interesting thing is what the government thought was really interesting, which is the shape of the craft itself. They mentioned a weird shape. The shape of their craft is not the shape of most normal UFOs.
Right.
You know, they don't describe the normal like saucer or cigar shaped thing. They claim that they got a very good look at it. They claim that it has wings almost on either edge with red lights on it, and that it's almost more of a from the front. It's almost more of a parallelogram is anything with geometry.
Didn't you
You
mention
know
it
what I'm
was
talking
more
like
like
rhombus. It's more of a it's almost like more of a rhombus, I guess you'd say.
it reminded you more of like a stealth fighter, right? Almost.
Yeah, it's well. I
Or
don't
like
think
an
I actually
alien
ended up
stealth
keeping that in
fighter.
the episode. I don't think I ended up keeping that in the episode, but yeah, look. Well, that's the thing.
Sorry, I thought I
think
heard
that's
that on
probably
your first episode, but I may
no,
have
no.
been mixing
I think
stories.
that's probably why the government was so interested. Was they were like, "Holy shit! Did they see one of our
Right,
fighters?"
right.
You know what I mean? Because like, yeah, it sounds like it from the front. It's a dark craft with a clear window of lights potentially coming from it, and then two wings that seem to come up and then down with red lights on the sides. That to me sounds like a person looking maybe at a weird stealth fighter or something. Like I I personally think besides like NICAP still going on and I think NICAP was still whatever. Besides the government still being interested in UFO reports at the time, it's those pieces that don't fit with the normal narrative that make some of these really interesting. And I think that's probably why Travis Walton's case is so interesting as well, is that he actually did seem to go missing for 5 days and then he just reappeared.
Yeah, and to me, it was more the types of aliens. How you had the Nordics, the whatever. I'll just say the Nordics and the Greys in there, which is interesting because the Nordics were they were the what you would call the benevolent space brothers. You know, they're kind of along that category.
Those beautiful, beautiful
Right.
blonde hunky aliens.
Right. The one, which is that's a whole nother
Stupid,
episode that we'll get
stupid,
into.
sexy aliens.
Stupid.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the Venetians that
Sexy
like how the
Flanders.
Venetians are the ones that have sex with you all the time, right?
Right, no, yeah, those are the Venetians are the ones that just love humans for some
All
reason.
right, a complete aside. Are you going to do a case on that guy? 'Cause
Oh,
that
of
was the
course
best.
we are.
That was the best story.
Of course we are.
All right, so listeners, keep it
DJ,
keep it
my
listen
girlfriend
out
is
for
an
that.
alien. She goes to a different middle school, and you haven't met her, but we met on vacation.
No, the guy with the hair. I'm talking the guy with the hair.
He's totally cool. Yeah.
Um,
So yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so I thought to me that was interesting about Travis's case, but also they didn't really have any messages for him or anything along those lines. Like they literally just, and spoiler alert, go listen to the episode, but they just fixed him up and put him back. Like that's literally all that was.
they're like, did our
Like, oh
they pick
shit,
him up
we
and-
just zapped this guy. Let's go.
Did we shock you?
Yeah.
So sorry, Mr. Walton. Let us put back your spleen. And then they dropped him off at a fucking gas station.
Which I thought was interesting too, was like the Jennifer Stein, the producer that I talked to, or who made the documentary, she mentioned too. She's like, so why do you think, we talked about this off the air? Was like, so why do you think it was a phone booth? It's almost like they knew that he needed to call somebody when he got back down. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oh, here's how you can help yourself more now when you wake up. There's a phone right there.
See, but that's one of those anomalous things, though, right? Like you have some, like I think it's really funny. Again, this is part of like, I always bring this up and we talk about this a lot, where it's like the pieces of the stories that don't really fit with modern science, but fit with the science of the times.
Right.
Right. So like what's his face? Woody Derenberger getting on board a spaceship and then them having like a tube TV.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the type of TV that your Nintendo 64 would be able to plug into.
Yeah.
Like they had those on the ship and he was like, damn, these are nice. You know what I mean? Like that's what he thought was science, was like scientific futurism at the time. The same thing happens for cases around the same time as Betty and Barney Hill, where they didn't really know about. They didn't really have a grasp of how much of our personal freedoms or privacy would be lost in the modern age. So, like, to us now, we would expect if an alien were to come to Earth, we would expect that they would be monitoring our information and learning about us from afar first, right?
Right. Right.
Like, because that's what our government does to, you know what I mean, like, to insurgents and whatever. Like, we can find out a lot of stuff from just like satellite
Yeah.
images and stuff,
Yeah.
right?
You're wondering like why the hell are they physically here if they
Exactly. Well, so the point is that, like, when the aliens supposedly talked to Betty, they were like, um, so what do you things eat? You know what I mean? They asked her. They were like, what's a vegetable?
Right.
And she was like, well, she didn't really know how to describe it or whatever. Or they come down and they're like, then they asked her. Then they asked her how. Oh, they had the whole thing with like Barney's dentures coming out, and they were like, "What?"
Yeah, they thought all humans, all humans' teeth.
Yeah, and they ran back in, and they were like, "Holy shit! Look at these weird teeth things this guy's got, right?" And it's like, you mean to tell me that? I mean, I don't know what aliens have never developed prosthetics.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's not it's not a hard, like, even fucking pirates had peg legs. You know what I mean? Like, we would, the aliens of the sea had peg legs. We would know. So for me, at least, them, like, the idea that they would drop him off at a phone booth actually makes some sense. But it's also like, they couldn't have figured out where he lived. You know what I mean? Like, it seems so, like, it seems just like the reasons people give for aliens doing stuff, like if aliens exist, are so strange to me. Like,
well, they put a human mentality around it because then, so
exactly.
my argument to counter argument to that would be, okay, well, it was on a secluded highway, basically, right? It was a gas station off a highway. So they didn't want anybody to see their ship, so they just dropped them off. And he said when he woke up, he kind of saw the lights flickering away from the same ship that took him. So, but then again, that's putting a human mentality on these beings that, this can get a little too down the rabbit hole for where we're going now. But, whether they're future humans or not, but it's almost putting too much of a human mentality around these beings that are just, oops, we zapped this guy,
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, and that's the other thing too, though, is it's like, if they want, if, like, they mentioned when they drop off Betty, when Betty says, they dropped us off, whatever, and she claims that they were originally going to give her, like, a book of alien knowledge, which, again, what? Why do aliens have books still?
Right.
Do they like the smell of the pages like I do? Like, why would an alien have a book?
They don't even have noses,
It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. I mean, I guess it could make sense, but like not.
Well, then you were saying that at the last minute they went to go. They're like, "No, we want the book back." And then they took it. It's like, how much more human
exactly.
do you want to make these?
Yeah, they're like, oh, actually, we don't think you should have anything to bring back. Which, like, that makes it seem like the aliens weren't planning on picking someone up. Which, like, I don't really think you would just do that spur of the moment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then on top of that too. Sorry.
That's all right. Switch to lights. I'm just kidding.
Then on top of that too, it's like, if they don't want them to remember, kill them.
Yeah, well,
You know what I
and
mean?
that was my whole thing with the Travis Walton case. That was the one confusion point that I had was, okay, so why didn't they just leave him? So they zapped him, and
Yeah.
then it's like, so, oh, my bad. Okay, we're never gonna, it's not like they're gonna have an international warrant for their arrest or intergalactic warrant for their arrest or something,
Yeah, like, what the hell do they care? Like, I mean, like, I guess there's some, I mean, this is why people now bring in this whole mythos of, like, well, they're actually good and there's bad ones and they have to take care of us and all this other whatever. But it's like, it's one of those things where, yeah, it doesn't, like, people go missing all the time.
Right, and it's like,
Right?
are they all abducted too, or not? And
Yeah, well,
most
I mean,
likely
that's
not.
kind of, yeah. So anyways.
But then I don't know. You do wonder about all that too. But going way back to your original kind of debunker theory there, the one thing that always stuck in my head for that was if he was just missing and hiding somewhere, whether purposely or by accident, then why didn't the scent dogs pick up on his scent? The police dogs. That was the
I
big
mean,
the big thing in my head that I didn't talk about on the episode either. But I was just like, they would have found him if he was just hiding in a cabin in the woods somewhere.
but that's the thing. Like can't scent dogs get like thrown off by rivers even, and like,
Yeah, but there
you know what
weren't
I mean?
any
Like,
in the middle of the forest, like, in the middle of the
well,
national forest. I don't think in that.
I don't know. I mean, I
And
think,
this is
yeah,
where
I
I
think
think
that,
I think we're looking too far into it on the other side. But
sure, yeah, yeah,
I mean, honestly, in this case, I think it's really as simple. The the simplest explanation always makes the most sense, right? And to me, the one that they brought up was that oops, he got zapped, and then they fixed him and put him back. That makes sense to me, like in my head at least,
I
Um,
don't know.
and there's also, I think, something to, and you mentioned this on one of the lowdown episodes. I couldn't remember which number you guys are up to versus which number
We're
I
only
listened
on
to.
two, I think. No,
I
three.
think you're on three.
I should know
It
that.
may have been
I
number
think.
two either way, where they had Travis Walton on that show. And there was
Yes, that was
something
two.
and there was something to watching him tell his story. And maybe I'm naive, but he doesn't look like he's full of shit. You know? Like he legitimately seems like this is what happened. I was a dumbass for getting that close to the ship, and
Sure.
let's move on from it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think that's definitely something to be said. He Travis himself comes off as very muted and professional, and like still like, what the hell happened to me? You know what I mean about
hmm
it? Whereas I think this actually kind of got Betty Hill into trouble later on in her life, where she came across as like a super true believer, a completely unskeptical, completely accepting everything about
Yeah,
this
correct.
whole
And
mythos,
that's where
right?
people are comparing Travis, like, oh, Travis took notes from the Betty and Barney Hill case, and I actually would say the opposite, where it's the differences between the two are what make me believe the
Sure. Yeah. I
Travis's
mean,
story a
if
little
he
bit more.
yeah if he took notes from the Betty and Barney Hill case, then he didn't do a very good job.
Right, exactly.
You know, um,
Unless he's like, here's what not to do, that.
exactly right. Yeah, yeah.
But even
This
now,
is
I
what I
mean,
didn't believe about that other
and
case.
then you have Betty's uh, niece, and you can cut this out if it's a spoiler alert or whatever. Betty's niece trying to sell the books now, saying she has new evidence for the case and that sort of stuff. So
Yeah, we didn't. I haven't really looked into that too hard. We didn't really talk about it because
it almost has that
I
same
don't.
mentality of okay, they're just trying to sell a book, like
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but it does. Yeah, I gotta get my hand on the book. I do want to read it and evaluate it for myself, and we'll probably do a follow up episode actually on it, on if there is any new evidence or
hmm
anything. But again, I think that for me at least, for the Betty and Barney Hill story, I actually think the simplest explanation is the simplest explanation is they were actually abducted by aliens, I guess.
right.
But the there's enough of a strong argument to be made for the skeptical side that I think this is not I even say it in the episode, this is not the smoking gun, this is not the slam dunk that it's sold as. This is an interesting story. It is an important moment in pop culture, but a real case of abduction, I'm not convinced
So
necessarily.
why do you think it's gained so much friction in pop culture? Like
Well, I
when
mean, it
people
was
say, "Tell me what you think of when you think of alien abductions," I would say 90% of the people that would actually have an answer to that would say Betty and Barney Hill case.
well, I think number one, and this is kind of an interesting question that people like.
And
This is
again,
an
I don't want to
interesting thing
spoiler
people.
alert episode 2, but
No, no, you're not. We
okay.
don't even get into this really. This is actually an interesting point that I think people always bring up, but I kind of think is stupid, right? Like people say, well, before this, no one ever thought about being, abducted or
Mm-mm.
whatever.
Not
Right?
yeah, not true
But
at all.
like,
Yeah.
what? Well, besides it not being true, just based on the facts, it's also like that's not a big leap to make.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's not like something is partly. If you think like there were movies that showed these whatever robots coming off the ships and shit, so it's like it. It's not that hard of a leap to think. Well, I could go up that causeway. You know what I mean? Like I could go up that ramp too, just as easily as the robot can.
Yeah, but I always wonder for specifically for the Hill case, it's like, what is it about that case when like you said, it's not a smoking gun case. I don't think on either side of the spectrum, really. Like, there's probably a little bit more, at least in my head, on the skeptical side in the Betty and Barney Hill case. But if that's the case, why haven't people just been like, "Oh, that's a hoax" and leave it alone? Like a lot of people do with what's his face, Billy Meyer.
Well,
You
there's
know?
there's just so much misinformation about the case out there. Like I, when people think of the Betty and Barney Hill case, I bet they are not thinking about what actually happened. They're thinking about what they've heard about the case,
Mm.
which is people are like most people don't realize they weren't taken out of their car. They aliens came down in like little vests and stuff and were like, "Stop your car." You know what I mean? Like they made a roadblock in the road supposedly, and then like walked them to the ship. That is stupid.
I don't know.
You know what I mean? Like
That sounds to me like I wasn't going to go down this road, but I will. What the hell? Was that that sounds to me more like one of those old school UFO cases where it's actually the military doing something and then tricking the people into believing they were abducted. You remember reading
I
about
mean,
those back in the day,
of
where they
course,
thought
yeah.
that
I
was
mean,
one of the
well,
theories on some of the UFO abductions, But
for me, listen, for me, what it almost sounds like more is they were stopped on the road and harassed.
mhm.
And the harassment was so disturbing to them that they put it away. They didn't think about it afterwards. They had to make up some story. You know what I mean? Like maybe there were men in the road and maybe they didn't like that there was a white woman with a black
I was
man.
gonna say there was a lot of cultural stuff, especially given the time frame and the interracial side for Betty and
Yeah, I
Barney
mean
Hill. And
like
you hinted to that in
like
episode one,
and
but
and and even without that aspect of it, right? They see a roadblock in the road and Barney has already mentioned in the trip being upset, being afraid of these white dudes in the country
hmm
looking at him and his wife.
hmm
You know what I mean? Like that idea was already primed in his head. He talks about it in the book. He talks about it with Dr. Simon, the hypnotist. You know what I mean? Like it's not a huge leap to make for me that I mean even if nothing happened to them on the road, right? Even if they just drive by a road stop or whatever, workers in the road.
mm.
They just drive by. He's zoning out. Later on, he pieces it together. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense too.
I
Yeah.
mean, anyways. So, I think the reason why it's picked up such kind of, I guess, like I said, like why it's picked up such steam in the popular culture is simply because of that. It's got a bit of everything. You know, these are two intelligent people, well respected members of their community. Suddenly they see something weird, they don't remember it, and then they have to go under hypnosis for it to come back out. That's fat, that's a good story.
Yeah.
Regardless if it's true or not, that's a great story. And then the way that it came to public attention wasn't because the Hills were talking about it to the newspapers or anything. It was because someone sent in an anonymous tape to a reporter at the Boston Globe.
Mm. Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? So like it has all these layers on top of it of this non-traditional couple for the time meeting something weird on the road and then on top of that too, they supposedly had physical evidence, right?
Yeah.
You can actually go see Betty Hill's dress, the ripped dress,
hmm
at the University of New Hampshire. They have it. They have it now. It's part of the collection at the Diamond Library. I got to see it when I was there as a student. It's amazing. It's really cool.
Have they done testing on that,
So
or do you? And again, just say spoiler alert and go listen to episode
no,
two. But
no. as far as I know, they tried doing. As far as I know, it's just a normal dress with a rip in it.
Mm. Did it have any
They
like
tried.
radiation or anything weird?
No. I mean, so supposedly after the fact, they both. We actually don't talk about this in the episode because there's just no evidence for it at all. They both claim that there was a pink powder on them after the event, and then it just kind of fell off and
And
disappeared.
that's what the niece's book is claiming too. By the way, I just remember reading
Oh,
that news
is the
article.
pink powder
Yeah, is I remember pink powder on the dress. So yeah, and there was something. Wasn't there something on the car too? The same pink powder,
on the car? There was supposedly
or
circles of
there we go.
magnetism
There's something on the car.
that we do talk about that in the episode. I'm actually gonna have to. I'm gonna have to download her book. If I can find it. Anyways, TJ, we're talking. It's late.
Yeah, it's all right.
We gotta wrap this bad boy up. Listeners, if you enjoy these episodes, let us know. We would be happy to do more of them because it's a lot of fun.
And we were just saying off the air
hang
that
out.
I've actually gotten some great feedback about these episodes from new listeners and old listeners. So, because I was always like, nobody's going to listen to these. These are just for Chris and I to BS, like just for us to have fun once in a while. But this is like honestly the most popular downloaded episode on my podcast. And I'm like,
Ooh.
so it's very interesting. And I'm like, yeah, we'll do it. Let's rock and roll. And I think
Hell yeah, man.
we're slightly more focused tonight, which is surprising given how late it is and how much podcasting we've been doing lately. But
but it's pretty good.
I would agree. Let us know. I think it's appropriate for UFO month, and I know you're probably going to get into some weird shit. I would assume around Halloween time for Mad Scientists. So, you want to pimp anything out like that for my listeners?
So yeah, we have the second part of the Betty and Barney Hill thing coming up now. We are actually, as part of Halloween, we're doing a whole bunch of special episodes. So the next one will be on Satanic Panic.
Yes.
And then after that, we'll be doing one actually on the history of Halloween and how it's celebrated around the world.
Ooh.
We're going to be doing our first true crime episode on mass shootings and what the statistics say about them, ways that science is trying to combat them, and kind of the history of the phenomenon. And actually, do you know when the first mass shooting in the U.S. was, TJ?
I don't.
It was in the 18th century.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It was super early. Like the first one was comically early in the United States.
Were they just like
it was around
reloading their pistols? Like
it was like around the time of the Declaration of Independence.
I mean, I guess the Revolutionary War, technically, right? I mean, but outside of that,
Well,
I assume you're talking.
So interestingly, the definition of what is a mass shooting and what isn't is really weird. There's a lot of strangeness going on in there. So yeah, I wanted to look it up to give you a good sense here. July 26, 1764 in Greencastle, Pennsylvania, there were 10 deaths and 2 injuries.
Oh wow.
That was the very first one.
Wow.
Isn't that weird? Yeah.
I never would have thought it was that early.
No, I didn't either until I read it and doing the research for this. And then we're also going to be doing another roundtable with, I hope, the guys from Blurry Photos. We kind of haven't ironed out all the details, but they're good friends of our pod, so we're super excited to have them on. But we'll be talking about our biggest fears.
Oh, okay, that should be fun.
Which is gonna be scary.
Are we talking rational or irrational, or a little of both?
Why not both?
Yeah.
Why not both? How about you, man? What's going on with your show?
So yeah, I have UFO month because I don't really dip too far into paranormal. Honestly, because I record in the basement and it freaks me the fuck out. So I'm like, I'm not recording stuff about shadow people when I can open this door to my little closet here and see one. Fuck that. I'm not doing that.
Sure.
Which go back and listen to our first little crossover episode if you want to know more about that.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a good one.
Alcohol induced as well. But anyway, I'm not drinking beer and opening up that to see that. So the creepiest shit for me that I would get into is the UFO side. And part of that was I really wanted to do this Travis Walton case because it was more I mean, my show doesn't cover a lot of mainstream stuff usually, or I try not to as much, with a few exceptions though. And I've always said that the Travis Walton case is definitely one of those exceptions. Another UFO case in New Hampshire, by the way, is the other one. Uh,
Yeah, I'm excited.
I'm not going to spoiler alert because we may be covering that as a combo show.
It's gonna be good.
That should be a lot of fun. So anyway, I'm going to get through that this month, and then another bonus beer episode at the end of the month, which I'll probably try to do that on Halloween, which that's always fun doing beer tastings. And then we'll see what happens beyond that. I mean, the good thing about being on summer break was a lot of people were like, "Hey, do you know about this?" And both of our buddies, Rob Christopherson, was like, "Hey, look about this case. Think about this case. Think about that one." Like, that guy's a wealth of information, man.
Listen, listeners, Rob Christopherson has an upcoming podcast called Our Strange Skies. Yes. It is going to be, Rob knows more about UFOs and the history of UFOs than anyone I have ever met. So you got to listen. It's going to be great.
He's just got like a square head on him, like we were talking about before. Like in the fact that he's not really in the true believer camp, but he's not in the debunker camp.
No,
he's
absolutely.
Just like,
Rob,
here's what it is, and here's what it looks like.
Absolutely. Rob is someone I think that you are going to get a unbiased opinion from. I think it's going to be worth listening to. I'm really excited.
He's fucking funny, man.
He's really funny.
And I think I realized that first when he was on your show. He did a guest spot way back on your show.
Well, now Rob is one of the four of us that do the lowdown. Yep. So you guys have heard it.
The lowdown, yeah. But I'm talking even before the lowdown was a TV show. Even,
he did a guest spot with us.
I'm thoroughly convinced from that episode that he was abducted. By the way, speaking of which,
dude, oh my god, his stories are fucking scary.
He's got a lot of stories, and they're creepy.
Yeah, he has loads. He has loads more than what we covered on the episode. Yep. And some of Rob's stories, I'm like, don't tell me that, man. That's too. It's getting too close.
Yeah,
now.
Exactly.
It's too scary.
So yeah, I would actually absolutely pimp out that show as well too. And I think it sounds like you have some cool stuff coming up too. I know my listeners are kind of split down the line with the true crime family and the kind of unsolved mysteries family. So I have both, and it sounds like if you're dipping into true crime a little bit, that should be fun for some of my listeners out there.
We definitely are. It's gonna be good. I'm really excited. Awesome. We're knee deep in autopsy reports right now. Ooh. So doing lots of stuff.
The only caveat with true crime is like you always have to tell people, be very vocal that you're doing something true crime related for a podcast, so that God forbid if something happened to you and they look through your browser history.
Oh my god!
Or worse yet, something happened to like Katie, and guess who the first suspect is?
So this is funny. At work today, I was at work today. At my job, we do a lot of like modeling on the computer for chemical engineering things, and so I have to like my computer has to just like run and calculate stuff because the stuff is complicated. And so in between it like running these models, I'm like listening to other podcasts or reading stuff on Wikipedia or whatever, and then writing down notes. And so since this next episode is on mass shootings, I was like writing notes on killers that go to their jobs. And I was in my job, and I'm looking at my phone or whatever, but I realized, like, I had a little notepad, and I realized I was writing stuff like, like guns most effective. No, like, you know what I mean? I was like, oh god!
It's like if we weren't on watch list enough already.
Exactly. Like I go to take a leak, and someone walks by my desk and sees me these fucking scribbles where I'm like, most effective mass killing in the United States.
Exactly. That's why it's good that we're documenting why we're doing some of this stuff.
Yeah, this is all for a podcast.
It's like people get worried when it's like, oh, don't mention Dulce. That's always my running joke with our little fraternity. Is like, don't mention Dulce. But it's not that side you got to worry about. It's the true crime side. It's like, why are you Googling how people dispose of bodies? You
seem to have Amazon searched a lot for lie. What are you doing?
So funny side note, but I'll tell you, Javier from Pretend Radio is one of my new favorite podcasts, but he's also becoming a pretty good friend of mine as well too. Just throughout, I feel like all of us that are kind of in the same boat as far as podcast popularity are kind of going through some of the same struggles sometimes. So you end up being pretty good friends pretty quickly, just like you and I did. But
Sure.
he was saying he did an episode on Todd Colehep, who was like a serial killer thing. And he started getting those Amazon ads for like shovels and they're like the stuff
Ice
yeah,
picks.
it was like weird stuff like that where he's like shipping containers, shovels, lie, like
God,
like,
that's
he'd be on something else, just randomly, or pull up a video for his kids online, and it's like pops up an ad for here's the type of shovel, and it happened to be the same time, so it does
Oh
happen.
boy.
It's kind of funny, but. That's all
Good
right.
stuff. All
All
right.
right.
Well, thank you, listeners, for listening to this bonus episode, and thank you, TJ, for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man. This is a lot of fun. I
No
think it
problem.
turned out a lot better than I anticipated, to be really
And we
honest.
thought 3 hours ago, and I was like, "Hey, you want to help me do my bonus episode?"
Sure, why not? And
Yeah,
this will be,
for sure.
this may replace one of my episodes during UFO month too, because
Oh, nice.
so I think we may drop off one of them. Sorry, Hopkinsville, and then just keep this instead, because I think this is way more interesting than hearing another rehashing of it.
Good stuff, man. Well, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Anytime, man. Thanks.
All right, dude.